Hello, boys and girls. This is Miss K. Today I'm going to read aloud a book to you titled Flat Stanley and the Firehouse, written by Lori Haskins Huran. Let's look at the cover of this book. Who do you see? What do you notice? What do you predict this book will be about? Let's get started. Stanley Lambchop lived with his mother, his father, and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide and half an inch thick. He had been flat ever since a bulletin board fell on him. Why is Stanley flat? Stanley's family found it handy having a flat boy at home, and Stanley didn't mind helping out. Stanley held tools for his father while Mr. Lambchop repaired the car. Stanley helped Arthur practice his backflips. Stanley gave Mrs. Lambchop a perfect place to roll out pie crust except when he felt ticklish. Look at how flat Stanley is. How helpful is Stanley at home? Stanley made a good stencil too. Hold still, said Arthur. Stanley held his breath as Arthur traced him carefully. Children all over the city were entering a poster contest for Fire Safety Month. Do you know what a stencil is? A stencil is a piece of material that has a design cut out and is used as a guide. I hope we win the trip to the firehouse, said Arthur. Me too, said Stanley. I have always wanted to slide down the pole. The next Monday, a letter arrived. Hey, guess what? Shouted Arthur. Hay is for horses, Mrs. Lambchop said. Try to remember that, dear. Sorry, said Arthur. Guess what? Our poster won the contest. We're going to the firehouse on Saturday. Mrs. Lambchop clapped. I knew you boys had my talent for art, she said proudly. What did Flat Stanley and his little brother win? Stanley and Arthur practiced fire drills all week long. Arthur crawled around the house on his hands and knees. Stanley did the stop, drop, and roll, mostly the roll. At last, Saturday came. The Lambchops drove to the firehouse. Welcome, bellowed Chief Abbott. A puppy bounced at his feet. Arf, 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 arf. Don't mind Spark, said the chief. He is still in training. Chief Abbott led the Lambchops through the firehouse kitchen. We firefighters cook up some tasty meals, he said. Mr. Lambchop got out his camera. He took a picture of a pot of chili. Everyone went on to the bunk room. Very nice, said Mrs. Lambchop. Can I see the truck, said Arthur. Of course, said Chief Abbott. He led everyone down to the garage. Stanley was disappointed. He had wanted to get there by pole. Boots and pants lay on the floor. Oh my, said Mrs. Lambchop. I could tidy up if you like. Chief Abbott laughed. We leave these out so we can jump into them in an emergency, he said. Neat, said Stanley. Chief Abbott pointed to the ladder truck. Climb on up if you like. Wow, said Arthur. The boys scrambled onto the truck. Spark was right behind them. Suddenly, the alarm bell rang. Chief, Code 9 on Oak Street, called a firefighter. The chief turned to the Lambchops. How would you folks like to come along on a rescue? A rescue? Will it be safe? Asked Mr. Lambchop. You bet, said Chief Abbott. Code 9 means a cat up a tree. Probably Furball again. Mr. Lambchop looked at his wife. She gave a little nod. Yes, yelled Stanley and Arthur. How can you tell Flat, Stanley, and Arthur are excited? Stanley, turn on the siren! Arthur, hit the lights! Shouted Chief Abbott. My goodness, is that necessary? Asked Mrs. Lambchop. No, said Chief Abbott. It's just more fun this way. The truck raced out of the station. Soon it pulled up to a tall tree. A tiny cat shivered at the top. She's pretty high up this time, said Chief Abbott. Spark panted at the chief's feet. All right, let's get her down. 2 firefighters raised the ladder. The Lambchops moved out of the way. Chief Abbott climbed until Furball was just a few feet away. Good kitty, he said, stretching out his hands. Come here, Furball. The cat is stuck high up in the tree. How do you think the cat is feeling? Spark started to bark. Arf, arf, arf! For a second, Furball froze. Then she jumped the other way. Furball! Cried Chief Abbott. He was too late. Furball was heading for the ground. The Lambchops looked up. Their mouths were open in surprise. Why did Furball the cat jump the other way? All at once, Stanley threw himself onto the grass. "Grab my hands," he told his mother. Mrs. Lambchop grabbed his hands. "Grab my feet," he told Arthur, but Arthur didn't move. Why did Arthur freeze? Why does he look like that? "Hey!" shouted Mrs. Lambchop at the top of her lungs. "Grab his feet!" Arthur blinked. He grabbed Stanley's feet. "Stretch!" cried Stanley. Arthur and Mrs. Lambchop stretched Stanley between them. They were not a second too soon. Boing! Meow! Furball bounced on Stanley's belly, then landed safely on the ground. The firefighters started clapping. Wow! Flat Stanley is a hero. He saved the cat. Arthur and Mrs. Lambchop stood Stanley back up. Arthur looked at his mother. "Hay is for horses," he said, "remember?" Mrs. Lambchop grinned. "Good work, Lambchops," said Chief Abbott, racing over. "How can we ever thank you?" "Well," said Stanley, "there is one thing." Whee! Boys and girls, have you ever been to a firehouse before? How was your experience? How was it like? Think about your experience and share it with someone in your house. I hope you enjoyed today's read aloud.